What if the largest naval force on the planet just sailed straight into a trap it can never sail back out of? 110 warships, more steel than most nations have ever built in a century, and every single one of them may now be sitting inside a kill box. Before we go further, hit that like button right now, subscribe if this is your first time here, and share this with someone who thinks bigger always means safer. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why that's not always true. For the last 20 years, China has been building ships faster than any nation in modern history. Shipyards along the coast work day and night, turning out destroyers, frigates, and support vessels at a pace that has stunned Western defense analysts. Today, China's Navy has more warships than the United States. Not more powerful ones necessarily, but more of them. And for a long time, that number alone was treated as the ultimate symbol of unstoppable strength. So when reports emerged of a massive coordinated deployment, something in the range of 110 Chinese naval vessels pushing outward through contested waters near Taiwan, the Philippines, and Japan, it looked, on the surface, like an unstoppable show of force. Warships stretching across the horizon, drone footage circulating online, naval officers in Beijing proudly describing it as proof that China could now dominate the waters near its shores whenever it wanted. But here's the problem with that story. The moment those ships moved past a certain invisible line in the ocean, they didn't enter open water. They entered a trap that has been decades in the making. A trap built not out of steel, but out of geography itself. To understand why, we need to talk about something military planners call the first island chain. It sounds abstract, but it's actually one of the simplest and most brutal concepts in modern naval strategy. Picture a string of islands running from Japan, down through Okinawa, across Taiwan, and continuing through the Philippines and into parts of Borneo. On a map, it looks like a loose, curved wall sitting just off China's coastline. That wall isn't natural. It's strategic. And it was never designed by China. It was designed decades ago by American military planners during the Cold War, specifically to box in Chinese and Soviet naval power and prevent it from ever reaching the open Pacific without passing through territory controlled by American allies. For most of the 20th century, this concept sat quietly in military textbooks. China's navy was too small and too outdated to make it relevant, but that changed dramatically over the past 2 decades. As Chinese shipbuilding exploded, Beijing's own strategists began openly describing the first island chain as a prison wall, something to be broken through, something standing between China and its rightful place as the dominant power of the Pacific. That ambition is exactly what led to this moment. A massive fleet surge, pushing outward, testing the boundaries, probing the gaps between islands, trying to prove that China's navy could now operate freely beyond the chain whenever it chose to. Except there's a problem nobody in Beijing likes to talk about publicly. Every single gap in that island chain is narrow, painfully narrow, and every single one of them is watched. Take the Miyako Strait, one of the widest and most commonly used passages between Okinawa and Taiwan. It might look wide enough on a map to feel safe, but underwater, and in the skies above it, it is anything but empty. Japanese destroyers patrol constantly. Maritime surveillance aircraft fly overhead nearly every single day. Undersea sensors, many of them installed decades ago and continuously upgraded, track any unusual movement through the channel. Chinese naval vessels moving through this strait aren't slipping past unnoticed. They're being logged, tracked, and analyzed the entire time, sometimes down to the exact minute they entered and exited. Then there's the Bashi Channel, sitting between Taiwan and the northern Philippines, another critical passage any Chinese fleet moving toward the wider Pacific has to use. This corridor sits uncomfortably close to Philippine military installations, some of which have expanded significantly in recent years, under new basing agreements with the United States. Anti-ship missile batteries, mobile launch systems, and reconnaissance assets now sit closer to this vital waterway than at any point in 50 years. This is the part that makes the entire situation so dangerous for Beijing. In peacetime, moving 110 ships through these narrow corridors is simply provocative. But if tensions ever escalated into real conflict, these same narrow passages instantly become choke points, where an entire fleet could be trapped, tracked, and destroyed in detail before it ever reached open water. Military history is full of examples, showing exactly how dangerous it is to funnel a massive force through narrow corridors. A large fleet loses almost every advantage its size normally provides the moment it's forced into a bottleneck. Numbers stop mattering when only a handful of ships can pass through a strait at any given time. Suddenly, it doesn't matter that you have 110 warships. What matters is how many of them can fit through a gap only a few miles wide, while being watched by satellites, submarines, and shore-based missile systems the entire time. And that leads to the deeper issue hiding underneath the raw ship count that Chinese state media loves to advertise. Quantity has never been the same thing as capability. A huge percentage of China's newer warships are optimized for coastal defense and regional patrol, not sustained operations far from home. Blue water naval power, the kind capable of operating for months at a time, thousands of miles from your coastline, requires far more than just a warship. It requires an entire logistics ecosystem, fuel tankers, supply ships, replenishment vessels capable of resupplying an entire battle group at sea without ever returning to port. China has made real progress building these support ships in recent years, but nowhere near the scale or experience level of the United States Navy, which has spent nearly 80 years perfecting long-range operations. This matters enormously, because the entire premise behind sending over 100 ships through the first island chain assumes those ships can be adequately supported, refueled, and resupplied well beyond friendly waters. But the moment you push a fleet that size past the island chain into contested or hostile waters, every single one of those supply lines becomes a target. Cut the fuel ships, and the warships become floating targets with a countdown clock ticking on their engines. If you're starting to see why this isn't the flex Beijing wanted it to look like, drop a comment below. It genuinely helps me understand what to dig deeper into for the next video, and it tells YouTube that people actually care about this kind of analysis, which helps this channel grow. Now let's talk about what's actually waiting on the other side of that island chain, because this is where the trap becomes even more obvious. Japan alone operates one of the most advanced navies. Over the last several years, Tokyo has dramatically expanded its own anti-ship missile capabilities, deploying mobile land-based launchers specifically designed to threaten any hostile fleet attempting to pass nearby. These aren't hypothetical weapons sitting in a warehouse somewhere. They're actively deployed, actively exercised, and specifically positioned along key stretches of the island chain that any Chinese surge would have to pass through. The Philippines has undergone a similarly dramatic transformation. For years, Manila's military was a weak link. That's changed fast. Expanded basing agreements with the United States now give American forces access to strategic locations across the northern Philippines, positions that sit uncomfortably close to the waterways. New mobile missile systems, some specifically designed to threaten warships from land, have been quietly deployed. This turns what used to be an open corridor into a heavily monitored, heavily defended stretch of water. Then there's the part almost nobody sees, because it happens completely underwater. Submarines. The United States, Japan, and Australia collectively operate some of the most advanced submarine fleets on the planet. Unlike surface ships, submarines don't announce their presence. 110 warships steaming look impressive. But underneath the surface, a single well-positioned submarine can pose a threat to that entire formation. This is the quiet, invisible layer of deterrence that surface fleet numbers can never fully account for. You can build 100 warships. You cannot easily build the decades of experience, quieting technology, and torpedo capability needed to counter an enemy submarine fleet refining its craft since the Cold War. This is precisely why military analysts describe the first island chain as a fully armed defensive network. It's not one country standing guard. It's an interconnected web of American, Japanese, Philippine, and increasingly Australian capabilities, all reinforcing each other across the string of islands. When Chinese warships sail through those gaps, they're not slipping past a passive boundary. They're walking directly through the most heavily monitored, most heavily armed stretch of ocean in the world. There's an economic dimension to this trap as well, and it might be the most painful one for Beijing. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil, and a massive percentage travels by sea. It passes through narrow choke points like the Strait of Malacca before ever reaching Chinese ports. Chinese strategists have openly worried about this vulnerability for years, calling it the Malacca dilemma. This is the reality that China's entire economy depends on sea lanes it does not fully control. Now overlay that vulnerability onto 110 warships pushing through the first island chain. Every one of those ships burns enormous quantities of fuel and requires steady logistics support to remain operational. Every mile they travel increases the strain on a supply network already stretched thin protecting oil imports. It's an expensive, resource-draining show of force at a moment when the domestic economy is facing headwinds. Maintaining a fleet this size, this far from home, is a financial gamble with enormous ongoing costs. And here's the part that should genuinely worry Beijing's naval planners the most. This deployment sends a message. For years, Chinese military exercises near Taiwan have grown steadily larger, more aggressive, and more frequent. They are widely understood as rehearsals for a potential blockade or invasion scenario near the island. Sending over 100 warships through the surrounding waters fits that pattern perfectly. But this is where the trap becomes most dangerous, because move against Taiwan requires extended operations. You're operating inside the most heavily watched and defended stretch of ocean on the planet. Every choke point that makes daily patrols risky becomes exponentially more dangerous during an actual conflict. Every ally currently watching quietly becomes an active participant the moment shots are fired. Quick pause here. If this breakdown is something you want more of, go ahead and subscribe right now. I break down stories like this every single week, and you really don't want to miss the next one. Let's dig deeper into why sheer numbers can be misleading in naval warfare, because history has taught this before. Before the First World War, Germany spent decades building what was considered a powerful battleship fleet. The High Seas Fleet was massive, modern, and a source of national pride, but it spent most of the conflict trapped. It was unable to challenge British naval dominance in open water without risking total destruction. All that investment and pride, and it fought exactly one major battle before retreating to safety. Size alone never guaranteed the ability to actually use that size effectively in real combat. A similar pattern played out with the Imperial Japanese Navy heading into the Second World War. At the time, Japan possessed one of the most technologically advanced fleets, with massive battleships. But overextension and stretched supply lines eventually turned that advantage into a catastrophic vulnerability. A powerful navy operating far beyond secure supply lines is not operating from a position of true strength. China's current naval posture carries uncomfortable echoes of both of these historical lessons.